In a single stretch of 2026, four things happened that look completely unrelated. Netflix beat almost every number Wall Street cared about and lost 9% of its value in an afternoon. Dozens of companies blamed their layoffs on AI, while the most rigorous data said fewer than a quarter of those cuts had anything to do with it. One of the world's biggest accounting firms watched a whistleblower report sit inside its own system for 2 years until it took out the CEO, the COO, and the chairman. And hundreds of enterprise security reviews approved vendors based on a compliance badge that, according to a whistleblower, was hollow. Four stories, four industries, and underneath all of them, the same four forces that are quietly running your company's quarter right now. By the end of this video, you'll be able to name all four, spot them in your own organization, and know exactly what to do about each one. By the way, I'm Rich Smith. I've spent more than 30 years as a chief marketing officer and growth advisor, and I run a practice called Revenue Science, applying behavioral economics to how companies actually grow. Every week on this channel, I break down the psychology behind the decisions that make or break companies. If that's useful to you, subscribe. It genuinely helps. Today, the four biases running your Q3: anchoring, self-serving attribution, diffusion of responsibility, and authority bias. One at a time, story first, science second, fix third. Let's start with Netflix. In Q2 2026, Netflix delivered $12.56 billion in revenue, up more than 13% year over year, with earnings right in line with Wall Street's model. Objectively, a solid quarter. Then management guided next quarter's revenue to $12.86 billion. Analysts had already priced in $13 billion. The gap, about $140 million, roughly 1%. The stock fell almost 9% in after-hours trading. Nothing about Netflix business changed that day. What changed was its position relative to a number that existed only in analysts' models. And Netflix wasn't alone that earnings season. IBM pre-announced results about 4% short of consensus and lost a quarter of its market value in one session, the worst single-day drop in its history. MSCI beat on revenue, missed earnings consensus by less than 1%, and still sold off nearly 9%. United Airlines beat outright and raised its full-year guidance, and the stock still slipped because next quarter's guidance landed under the street's model. Four companies, four industries, one identical pattern. The size of the miss and the size of the reaction had almost nothing to do with each other. Here's the science. This is the anchoring effect, one of the most replicated findings in behavioral research. Tversky and Kahneman showed that once people form an initial reference point, even an arbitrary one, every later judgment is an adjustment from that anchor, not a fresh assessment. And prospect theory explains why the swings feel so lopsided. People weigh a loss against a reference point roughly twice as heavily as an equivalent gain. A result slightly below the anchor doesn't register as almost there, it registers as a loss. Now, here's the part most coverage skips. Some companies use this on purpose. Apple spent years guiding conservatively and then clearing its own bar quarter after quarter, a pattern so consistent, analysts called it sandbagging. That's not dishonesty, that's expectation architecture. A company that consistently sets an anchor it can beat converts every earnings call into a trust-building event instead of a coin flip. You're running the same experiment whether you mean to or not. Every sales forecast, every client delivery date, every ROI projection in a pitch deck plants an anchor you'll be judged against. The fix is 3 questions before your next number ships. What am I anchoring people to? Can my team beat it under normal execution? Not the best case. And would 95% of that number read internally as a win or a failure? If the answer to that last one is failure, your anchor is aspirational and calibrated. You've built a trap for yourself. Bias number 2 hides inside the biggest business narrative of the decade: AI layoffs. You've probably seen the statistic that 56% of this year's layoffs cite AI. It's startling and it's misleading. That number counts announcements that mention AI. The more rigorous data from Challenger Gray and Christmas attributes about 101,000 announced US job cuts to AI through June of this year, roughly 23% of the total. Same headline, two very different numbers. And even that 23% measures what companies said, not whether a working AI system actually replaced anyone. Gartner found that 80% of surveyed organizations reported workforce reductions tied to automation, with no correlation to higher AI returns. Layoffs may free up budget for AI, they don't prove AI did the work. So, what's really happening? A very old bias in a brand new costume: self serving attribution bias. We credit success to our own skill and blame failure on outside forces. Individually, it sounds like the market turned. At corporate scale, it sounds like AI. Think about the two scripts a CEO can read. We built our cost structure for growth that never showed up, and we're cutting headcount to protect margin. That invites hard questions about leadership. We're becoming an AI first organization. That sounds like foresight. Same decision, opposite reputational cost, which is exactly why AI has become the most flattering alibi available to any executive who needs to explain a smaller org chart. Three real companies, three different truths. Microsoft cut roughly 4,800 roles in July 2026, concentrated in a struggling Xbox division, and explicitly said those roles weren't being directly replaced by AI. UPS announced up to 30,000 cuts, driven mostly by falling Amazon delivery volume, not automation. And Klarna is the cautionary tale. In 2024, its CEO said that an AI assistant had replaced roughly 700 customer service roles. By 2025, he was rehiring humans, admitting the company had focused too much on efficiency and cost. The AI narrative was real until customers and the balance sheet tested it. Why does this matter beyond optics? Because employees who sense a manufactured narrative disengage exactly when discretionary effort matters most. Enterprise buyers treat inconsistent AI claims as a reason to renegotiate, and employees who believe AI is code for layoffs stop surfacing the automation opportunities that would make AI actually pay off. The fix: separate the four things that get fused into one. Work AI has actually automated. Cuts made to fund an AI investment. Restructuring based on anticipated capability. And ordinary performance cuts wearing an AI label. If you can name which is which with a number attached, call it AI driven. If you can't, it's a management decision, and calling it anything else is a bet against your own credibility. Bias number three: cost four executives their jobs at one of the biggest firms in the world. On May 30th, 2024, a whistleblower inside KPMG Australia made a protected disclosure alleging audit independence failures and misuse of confidential client information. The warning entered the system: management, legal, an external review, a board subcommittee, and for nearly 2 years, the system absorbed it. It took a senator raising the allegations in the Australian Parliament in March 2026 to make the matter unavoidable. What followed was a rapid unraveling. The CEO resigned, the national audit chief stepped down the same day, the COO stepped aside, the chairman left, staff were fined, the regulator intensified oversight. And here's the most instructive detail: KPMG's own diagnosis. The firm admitted its treatment of the whistleblower. The rigor of its investigations and the leadership's response all fell short. The core failure wasn't only misconduct, it was that a serious warning sat inside a large organization long enough for everyone to conclude someone else must be handling it. Behavioral science named this in 1968. Darley and Latane found that 85% of people who believed they were the only witness to an emergency reported it. Add one bystander, 62%. With four others present, 31%. Nothing about the emergency changed, only the perceived math of who else could act. Now, the uncomfortable modern finding: formal policies and procedures can actually make this worse because employees infer that the system is already responsible. Your hotline, your committee, your outside counsel, each one can become another reason for every individual to do nothing. This isn't unique to auditing. Independent investigation into General Motors' ignition switch failure described what it called the GM nod: a room full of executives nodding at a plan, then leaving with no intention of personally acting. A defect suspected internally for years cycled through committees until it became a real crisis linked to 124 deaths and a $900 million settlement. Different industry, same architecture. Visible problem, ownerless response. And before you file this under compliance, don't. The same diffusion that buries whistleblower reports buries customer complaints. The complaint your team dismisses as frontline noise is often your earliest, cheapest sign of building churn, discounting pressure, or regulatory exposure. Warning handling architecture is revenue architecture. The fix is this, in one line: one red flag, one accountable owner, one response clock, one escalation path, one closure memo, not legal and HR, not the committee, one name. Work can be delegated, accountability cannot. The last bias is the one your deal desk is most exposed to right now. In March 2026, an anonymous whistleblower alleged that a compliance automation startup called Delve had generated SOC 2 reports with pre-written auditor conclusions, and that in a leaked set of 494 reports, 493 shared near identical language. The company disputes the allegations, and regulators will sort out the legal truth. But one fact needs no adjudication. Across hundreds of enterprise security reviews, a badge did the work that diligence was supposed to do. Procurement teams screenshotted a check mark, typed compliant, and moved on. The science saw this coming decades ago. Milgram found 65% of ordinary people would follow instructions to administer what they believed were maximum voltage shocks because a man in a lab coat said to continue. Then in 1974, Leonard Bickman took it to the street. Identical requests, 3 outfits, street clothes, 30% complied. A milkman's uniform, 47%. A security guard's uniform, 76%. Nothing changed but the costume. In B2B buying, the uniform is the badge. A framework logo on a trust center is a guard's jacket for your deal desk. And when the question is hard, is this vendor actually secure? Our fast thinking mind quietly swaps in an easier question: does this vendor look certified? This didn't start with software. Walgreens committed roughly $140 million to its Theranos partnership, even after its own laboratory consultant reported he'd been refused access to validate the device and urged executives to slow down. They proceeded anyway, reinsured in part by a board of former secretaries of state and defense, authority in its purest costume. The prestige was verifiable. The evidence never was. Here's the growth angle. This is now a differentiation opportunity. When every badge is suspect, the vendor that makes verification easy wins. Named auditor, scoped report shared without being chased, a trust page that reconciles with the actual artifact. Inspectability is the new trust asset. The company that can be checked beats the company that merely looks checked. And if you're the buyer, the badge starts diligence. It never ends it. Now watch what happens when you put the 4 together. Because inside a real company, they don't take turns, they compound. An aspirational forecast sets a bad anchor. When the quarter misses the anchor, self-serving attribution kicks in, and the explanation protects leadership instead of informing everyone else. Early warnings that could have flagged the miss, the complaints, the churn signals, the concerns from the field, diffuse through committees with no owner. And the whole time, the dashboards and badges and credentials everyone trusts goes uninspected because they look official. That's not four separate problems. That's one system running without an architect. And the leaders who grow predictably aren't smarter than everyone else. They've just built their forecasting, their communication, their escalation paths, and their verification habits around how humans actually behave. If you want to know which of these four is quietly costing your company the most, I built a free diagnostic for exactly that, the Growth Engine Scorecard, at richmsmith.com/scorecard. It takes a few minutes and it will show you where the gaps are. Each of these four stories also has a full written breakdown with the research and the tools on the blog at richmsmith.com/blog. I'll put links in the description. If this was useful, subscribe and hit the bell. Every week, I break down the psychology behind the decisions that make or break companies. I'm Rich Smith. See you in the next one.